Let's move on to the financial implications, right? So we have seen how technologically it's an improvement on compared to the current network, financial network. But what are the financial implications of this, right? What happens when Bitcoin enters the world of finance, right? That is where I think I bring my expertise, and let's dive into it. So let's start with some of the labels that are commonly assigned to Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is risky, it's a scam, it's a Ponzi, it's used by criminals, it's money laundering, it's volatile, it's a bubble, it's illegal, it's speculation, right? So we'll look into each of these aspects, and we'll see if these aspects are really valid when these are tagged to Bitcoin, right? So first of all, everyone needs to know that Bitcoin is completely legal in India. There was a short phase where Bitcoin was made illegal, but cryptocurrency exchanges basically filed a case in the Supreme Court, and they demanded government to remove the ban because it's inherently a technology, and technology is not good or bad, it's neutral, right? So you can police the use of the technology, but you should not ban the technology itself. And that is where Supreme Court agreed, and it said that technology cannot be made illegal. However, you can have regulations to regulate how the technology is being used, right? So at this point of time, Bitcoin is completely legal to be held, just as any other asset, right? The only differentiating point is that Bitcoin capital gains are taxed at 30% flat, right? So there is no short-term, long-term differentiation. All your Bitcoin gains will be taxed at 30%, right? That's the only differentiation. Uh, Moving on, so people often say that Bitcoin is used by criminals, right? Why should we use Bitcoin? But I often tell people that by that logic, criminals use all sort of these technologies. They use vehicles, cell phones, internet, they use their language, they use their guns, they use paper currency, they use gold, right? So all these are also technologies, right? So these technologies are not being banned, right? We assign the
Right.
blame to the criminals, not the technology. So why should it be any different with Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is just a technology. It's up to the user how he uses that technology. If the user is bad, well, you can police the use by that user. Yeah? Catch the criminal. You can put him in jail. You can implement all sorts of restrictions, but you cannot tell people that using Bitcoin is bad, right? So that is where the basic disagreement uh, comes from my side whenever people ask this question.
True.
Uh, Also, one of the aspect that I always point out is that you said Bitcoin is used by criminals, but do you know that big international banks have been known for money laundering for all these years? And the graph that you see on the right side of the presentation, these are some of the largest international banks who have paid billions of dollars as fines when they have been caught doing money laundering. And you can imagine, for example, BNP Paribas, they have paid a fine north of $8 billion. So when they are paying fine of $8 billion, can you imagine how many billions of dollars they have actually laundered to pay this fine? It would be
Yeah.
much more. So criminals have never uh, uh, were never stuck. They always had traditional systems for them to help them move their money around. So Bitcoin is no improvement in that. Actually, Bitcoin is difficult for them to understand, difficult for them to transact, right? So it is basically very user friendly for smaller players as compared to larger players, these
True.
criminals and these institutions, right? So
To
it is
add to
not.
this, yeah, sorry. To
No.
add to this, there have been a lot of mismanagement of funds in Indian system, Indian banking system as well. You have
Yeah.
your Punjab National Bank example, you have your SBI classic example.
Yeah.
We have seen this in the past, and this is nothing new. So when people narrow it down to okay, Bitcoin is bad, banking system is good, you need to be very skeptical and open-minded to see what has happened in the past also with the whole traditional banking system, and
Yeah.
then do apples to apples comparison, because the
Yeah.
number of frauds and cases with respect to Bitcoin, it's human error. Basically, a person could be phishing, or a person could be impersonating as someone else, or quote unquote, I am in distress, give me that amount of money. That sort of stuff might happen, social engineering on Bitcoin, but it is not the technological fault. It is not the system's fault on which it is built. It is the human factor which you know you know disrupts the whole system, and that's why the cases of fraud tend to happen. We've recently seen a case of fraud, a Bitcoin Ponzi scheme fraud, which has come in the newspapers of late in the last 2 to 3 days. I do urge you to read that and then watch this presentation again to see where the difference lies. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
please, one.
definitely. Okay. So moving on, Bitcoin is often called a scam, right? And so why is it called a scam? Because it is often clubbed with all other cryptocurrencies, right? So this is what you normally see. It's the perception is that Bitcoin is just another cryptocurrency, right? And because cryptocurrencies are known to be so volatile and so risky, and they can shut down at any point of time, and anything can happen, that is why that the general association comes to Bitcoin also. But what people need to understand it is Bitcoin is very, very different as compared to all of the cryptocurrencies, right? And why is that the case? We'll look into that here. So as you can see, I have taken a snapshot of the market cap of all the major cryptocurrencies across points of time. And as you can see, Bitcoin has always remained at top of the market, right? And it has more or less captured at least 50% of the market share when it comes to the cryptocurrency market cap, right? And why is that the case? That is the case because Bitcoin is the fundamental innovation. Bitcoin is the disruptive technology, and Bitcoin is where the invention or the innovation of cryptocurrency starts, right? So the basic invention is so flawless and so beautiful that that never dies. But the people who are trying to replicate this innovation with some other mix and match situation, some other addition, some other modification, uh, they would say that they are trying to better Bitcoin, but they would not say that they are themselves trying to benefit from the modification, right? They are themselves trying
Absolutely.
to scam people using some or the other uh, illusionary scheme that they're presenting to the market, right? And uh, people get swayed with it. People think that, oh, this might be a real innovation, and let's invest into it. But eventually, they tend to understand that the fundamental innovation is so perfect that you can build on top of that innovation itself. You don't need a completely different cryptocurrency to be born into existence. And that is why you see roughly 8,000 cryptocurrencies existing at this point of time. I'm not even sure what's the latest count, but this is what happens when everyone is trying to scam the market and trying to lift some easy money out of the market, right? But despite of all that, Bitcoin does not lose its shine. It is still on top of the market because it is the fundamental innovation. And when you understand this, you basically understand that Bitcoin is very different, right? It is not operated by one single company, one single foundation, one single team of developers, right? It is totally decentralized. It is ruled by the market. It is of the market for the market, right? And that is why Bitcoin is very different.
One thing to add to this, I have literally heard people around me asking, their favorite influencers have recommended certain coin. Do we invest in it? And I was like, please refrain from all of them because they might be earning commissions on the shilling that particular product.
Yeah.
But you need to be aware of what Bitcoin is because that's the bedrock of cryptocurrencies on a global level. If you understand that, then you will realize that there are 20,000, 30,000 currencies made on top of it using its technology, but altering it completely different and telling, okay, this is superior than Bitcoin. So this is something which irks me a lot. And when people ask me about, should we do this? Is quote unquote Picoin better, or is Ripple better? I was like, hold on for a second. What are you doing this for? Are you understanding what the underlying technology is and then trying to invest, or you just want to gamble and throw your money? In that case, nobody can help you. I cannot help you. Please go ahead and do whatever you feel like doing. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on this there.
Yeah, definitely. Uh, Yeah, very well said, Nihal. I think we'll discuss a lot on this topic going forward when I
Yes.
discuss
Yeah.
more of the financial implications and how Bitcoin changes the game altogether. But moving on with the current presentation. So
Sure.
here is one more comparison that I do of Bitcoin with all other cryptocurrencies. So Bitcoin is supposed to be the first cryptocurrency and the true invention, right? This is what made independent currency existence possible on the internet, right? In that sense, it's the first true invention, and all these other cryptocurrencies are basically copies of that code. Uh, Another differentiating point, Bitcoin has no central authority, right? There is no single company, there is no single foundation, there is no single team of developers which can control how Bitcoin functions, right? But that's not the case with all these other cryptocurrencies. If you type the name of these cryptocurrencies in Google, you will often find a foundation or a company which is running that cryptocurrency, which has an office, which has a team of developers, which has a headquarter, which has a marketing team, right? So you are basically looking at a company, not at a currency, right? And these tokens are basically equity shares which are issued without the permission of the regulator. So these are unregistered securities which are issued to the market, right? These companies are basically trying to scam you when they say that this is a cryptocurrency, when essentially it's not a currency, it's just a token which is issued by some private party or a private company, right? And that is
True.
why Bitcoin is really, really different, because Bitcoin does not have a central authority. Bitcoin has no headquarter. Bitcoin has no marketing team. Bitcoin has no team of developers. Bitcoin has no roadmap. No one can tell you what will happen to Bitcoin in the future, because it's a currency which is off the market for the market. If the market wants the currency to change in a certain manner, it will change. But if the market does not want it, it will not change. There is no team of developers which will tell you how the currency will change, because no one knows how the currency will change, right? And that is what makes Bitcoin very different from all these cryptocurrencies, right?
Correct.
No
A,
marketing
s- a
team,
s-
no offices, no headquarters. Yeah,
yeah.
sorry.
A slight correction there. In terms of Bitcoin, there are a bunch of developers and maintainers who oversee the Bitcoin network's health,
Yeah,
but they have no active say in how the protocol should move forward. Like if
yeah,
it's a consensus based, so this is where the concept of nodes come in, where every node runner in their respective places gets to upgrade to a new Bitcoin software version which has the change of rules. So if you're not agreeing to that rule set, you can stick to the old version and continue running your Bitcoin. But having said that, the old Bitcoin software version will always be compatible with the forward versions. So yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And as we know that there are thousands of road nodes running across the globe, it is
yeah,
impossible to dictate everyone to change to one particular version of the software, right? If
correct.
it's in their long-term interest, only then they will agree to changing the protocol itself, because their money, their net worth is invested in the network, so they will not want to harm the network, right?
True,
And that is
true,
that is when I say that Bitcoin is for the market and off the market. Only when the market desires that the network should change, only then the network will change. It will not change based on the dictation of one particular group of developers, right?
correct.
Yeah. Another differentiating point, people often tell me that I have this cryptocurrency, that cryptocurrency, but there is no liquidity. I am not able to sell it, right? That thing will never happen with Bitcoin, right? Because Bitcoin is so widely available, it has a huge market, right? As compared to these other cryptocurrencies, which often do not have too much liquidity, which have very few traders available in the market. And that is why if you have a lot of this cryptocurrency with you, you will not be able to get out of it. So you're essentially stuck. Your money is gone, right? That will never happen with Bitcoin, because at this point of time, the market is so deep, so huge, that 24/7 you can buy or sell your Bitcoin
True.
without any impact to the price, right?
Now you have
Uh,
big institutions coming in as well, right? Like with
yeah,
the onset of the US ETFs, which launched on Jan 10th of this year,
yeah,
there is a lot of money pouring into the network, and they have their interests in mind. So they will not allow the Bitcoin network to fail for any reason. The
yeah,
big corporations and organizations. So it's not hobbyists or nerds from different parts of the world coming together and building a network. That's how it started, but it's become much more bigger now, where you have international organizations, corporations involved, and have their own interests to protect the network.
yeah. Bitcoin is essentially seeing the very common technology adoption curve, right? Initially, there are very few users of technology, but eventually, if the technology becomes more well known, people are more aware of the benefits, and people are more happy with how the technology betters something that they have been initially using. The users grow, and then larger companies, larger institutions enter the market, and start offering their services on top of that product, right? So Bitcoin is the
Okay.
basic product, and these ETFs are the services that are offered to use that product better in a better manner, right? It's basically
Yeah.
improving the user interface, user interaction, right? Last point, Bitcoin is a commodity at this point of time. What that basically means is that no single party has control. It trades like gold, metal, oil, cotton, all these commodities, right? So because all these commodities are a part of the market, and the market dictates how the price will move up or down, right? In the same way, Bitcoin is also a commodity, and the market dictates what will happen to the price, right? If you compare these to all these other cryptocurrencies, they have so much control on that cryptocurrency that they can impact the functioning or the dynamic of the cryptocurrency itself. So it's not just the market, it's the company itself which is influencing the cryptocurrency, which is bad for you. Because if you want to invest in a company, why would you not invest in equities, which are
Yeah.
larger and publicly known companies, which are much more analyzed? Why would you go with
Mhm.
these cryptocurrencies, which are known to be much more risky? Because essentially they're just trying to copy Bitcoin. They don't have any use case as such, right? So yeah, those are the key differentiations. If any of your viewers have any questions on these aspects, I would be really happy to answer those questions. Uh, Moving on. So this is one more aspect of Bitcoin which is very important. People say that Bitcoin is very volatile, right? But what people need to understand is that Bitcoin is a new technology, and that is why the price is very volatile in the short term. But whenever you're investing in Bitcoin, and that is where I bring my financial mind into this, right? If you're looking at it from an investment perspective, investments are not made for the short term, right? Investments are always made for the long term. So if you look at it at Bitcoin also from a long term perspective, what happens? You see a graph which is something like this, right? This is a logarithmic graph. The 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 price rise, as you can see on the y-axis, is not the same, right? So the lower section is going from point 1 to 1, the top section is going from 1 to 10, and the other top section is going from 10 to 100. So the price increases exponentially as the time moves forward, right? So this is called a logarithmic graph, and this is how Bitcoin proceeds with time, right? And that is why the gains that people receive when they invest in Bitcoin are enormous. They are not comparable to any other asset class when you look into the market, right? Because it's a fundamentally new technology, and because not everyone understands it, the gains that are yet to be made are huge in this asset class, right? But again, coming back to the basic point, you should look at it from a long term perspective. Price should not be looked at from a short term perspective, because obviously it will be volatile. It is volatile because it's a new technology, right? If you look at it from a long term perspective, you will actually get to know how it is doing as compared to other asset classes, right? Because even equities have some volatility, even gold prices have some volatility, even vegetable prices have some volatility, right? You cannot look at it from a short term perspective,
Yeah.
right? It is always up and down.
Yeah. And by long term, might I add to that?
Yeah,
It's always beneficial to, if you're focusing solely on Bitcoin's timeline, there in the past, obviously, it's not a guarantee of how things turn out in the future. In the past, after every halving, after every Bitcoin halving, which recently happened, there has been a considerable spike in the price,
yeah,
6 to 12 months after the halving. So
yeah,
this has been a noted pattern in the past. Again, this is not a guarantee it will happen in the future, but if you're looking to hold, and if you're looking in investment terms, 4 years is the minimum time that you need to stay invested.
definitely.
And without that, like every day you might see like a 2%, 10, that's normal. Upwards or downwards, that's completely normal. But in the long
Yeah,
term, that's the like Varun mentioned, that's the log pattern. It's always up in the long term.
yeah. Okay. So now, since we have studied all the stereotypes or the tag words that Bitcoin often gets, we'll look into more deeper aspects. How does Bitcoin actually compare to all other asset classes which are there in the market, right? If we are saying that Bitcoin is a good investment, well, how good investment is it? How does it compare to all other investment products which are there in the market, right? So let's look into that aspect. So to start with, I'm comparing Bitcoin with You can say stocks or mutual funds, right? Equity, that is the asset class, the broader asset class that we are talking about, right? So when you talk about equity, you would remember that during COVID, there was a lot of so these travel companies or these tourism companies, they went into a lot of problem because there was essentially no tourism. There was a lockdown implemented, right? So people could not travel, and this industry, all the players within this industry found it very difficult to sustain themselves because essentially they were not getting any customers. Their revenue was zero, right? So this is something that we called an industry risk. If a risk materializes itself on an industry level, you are not isolated from it. If the industry is impacted, the company is impacted, right? uh, you People would have been aware of the Satyam scam. I think it happened back in 2009 or 10. I'm not sure. But what happened was this: there was this company called Satyam, and it was run by this person called Ramalinga Raju, and he did some accounting fraud because of which the company went into a deep problem. It basically went into bankruptcy, and then it was taken over by Mahindra, right? So this is what we call a management risk, right? So if the management does not function honestly and truthfully, and if they take some bad decisions, then basically the company is at risk, right? The company can shut down, the company can go into bankruptcy, and if you have invested in the company, your money can go to zero. This is what is called a management risk, right? Because there's always a management involved when you invest in a company. Then people would be aware that there's a Dream 11 case where there has been a huge GST fine or GST penalty that has been sent to them, and that penalty is known to be so huge that it is bigger than the value of the company itself, right? So people have become very fearful, very skeptical. They have really wondered if the company will really survive or not, if the government really implements this penalty that it has sent, right? So if they are made to pay this penalty that the government has issued, then the company will not survive itself, right? So there is something called regulatory risk. If the regulator does not agree with how you are doing your business, your company itself is into jeopardy, right? The company can itself collapse, the company can itself shut down, so your money will wipe out, right? So, and people would have heard that there was this very famous startup called WeWork. It was valued at something around $50 billion at one point of time, and it also went public, but eventually it went bankrupt, right? So, why did this happen? This happened because it sustained for some brief period of time, but the business model was not long term sustainable, because of which the company went into bankruptcy, right? So this is another risk, right? If the business model sustains for a small period of time, but it is not able to sustain for a longer period of time, your company is at risk of shutting down because of that business model itself, how it is doing that business, right? So these are some of the risks which we encounter when we invest in companies, when we invest in equities. And not just that, equity investments go through all these various kinds of risk, right? And that is the
Right.
reason why it is often recommended by all financial experts that you diversify your money. You should not invest your money in one single asset or in one single company, right? Because what happens if that company has this risk because of which that company is shut down? All your money will go down, right? So you do not want to lose your money completely. So that is why you should distribute your money across various companies, so that even if one company or some companies shut down, you do not lose complete capital that you have invested, and other companies actually give you some better return, so that you realize at least some return on the money that you have invested, right? So diversification always should be part of your portfolio when you are dealing with risky assets, right? But what happens is when you diversify, so let's say there's one company that went up by, let's say, 100%, but as part of my diversification strategy, I have only invested 5% of my money, 5% of my capital in that company. So only 5% of my capital will go up by 100%, not 100% of my capital, right? So diversification reduces your risk, but it also reduces your return with that, right? So it's a win-lose situation. You win some, you lose some. You lose a lot of gains, but you also win some security with your capital, right? Your capital is protected, it will not go to zero, right? But you also lose some big gains if that happen with some of your companies. So there's a trade-off involved here. So how does Bitcoin compare to this? Bitcoin is not an equity investment; it's a currency, right? And because it's a currency, it is not affected by any of these factors, right? It might be affected maybe by regulatory factors. You can say that the government is not really, positive, and it might implement this or that regulation. But you need to understand that this is a technology which is taking over the world, right? More larger and larger institutions, more and more countries are getting interested in this technology. And if your country, your government wants the betterment of their citizens, they will always view this technology in a good light, not in a bad light, right? Because essentially the technology always improves how humanity interacts with each other and how humanity produces value, right? So as a technology and as a currency, it does not have those risks which come with equity investments, right? Because of which Bitcoin inherently becomes less risky than all these equity investments. And that you really need to understand. Bitcoin does not have these risks. Bitcoin has volatility, but that volatility is subjective. It is only on the short term basis. If you look at it on a long term basis, then these risks are not involved, but the returns are much better as compared to equity, right? So from my perspective, it's a win-win situation. You get less risk and more returns, right?
Sure.
Uh, let's look at another comparison. Here I'm comparing Bitcoin to real estate or land, right? How does that is also a investment product that people obviously have. Yeah, real estate, people know that it goes up in value, so it's a good investment. It's known by everyone. Generations have in our past generations have invested in real estate, and everyone says that a home or your property is a good asset to have. But how does that asset compare to Bitcoin? Let's look at that, right? So whenever you look at real estate, you often come across these problems, right? So if you have listened to this movie Khosla Ka Ghosla, you would know that there's always this land mafia who can take
Yeah.
over possession of your land, right? So your land is not inherently safe or protected, right? You need to always make sure that there's abundant security through which your land or your real estate or your property is protected, right? So there's security cost involved. Then there's another aspect of property tax. If you have a property, you have to pay a tax every year, irrespective of have you realized a gain or not on that property, right? So there is this aspect as well when you hold a property, right? There's this aspect of real estate brokers which are often involved whenever you make a deal, and these brokers always take a substantial cut out of your transaction, right? So for example, if you're purchasing a flat, let's say worth 80 lakhs, the brokerage will not be less than, let's say, 50,000 or 1 lakh. So that's a substantial amount that you're paying in that transaction, right? So that also becomes a huge cost when you're doing such kind of a deal, right? And last but not the least, uh, you always need to take loans, because these real estate or land investments, or even if you buy a flat or a property, these are not cheap, right? You cannot start with, let's say, 100 rupees or 1,000 rupees. There are obviously REIT options available. So REITs are like instruments which tokenize real estate and they make that available on the stock market. But it's a new product and not everyone has access to that, but everyone has access to real estate. But with that access come these problems, right? So people often take loans to invest in their house or their property. So the ticket size is large. You cannot invest a small sum of money, right? So there are these problems. Not just that, these there are other problems as well which are associated with real estate investments or land investments, because of which it's not a very commonly accessible investment product for a lot of people, right? And that is where Bitcoin is different. Why? Because you can start with a small amount of money. So there are cryptocurrency exchanges right now which can offer you Bitcoin worth, let's say, 100 or 200 rupees also. So you can start with a sum which is that small, right? You can always sell when needed. So there's no liquidity issue. There are no brokers. You don't need to go search for buyers. You don't need to pay huge transaction fees, huge brokerage, right? So the transaction fee that you offer to these cryptocurrency exchanges are very, very small. You would not even realize, right? So and there's no maintenance, there's no property tax that you have to pay, right? There's no security aspect involved. If you store Bitcoin properly and safely once, then there's literally no cost for that storage of the Bitcoin, right? And it is very easy to store. It's not that difficult, right? Definitely easier as compared to securing your land or your flat, right? So Bitcoin does not have these problems which are also associated with all these real estate investments, because of which it becomes inherently a much better investment as compared to real estate, right? Let's look at another asset, fixed deposits. I'm not sure how many of uh, people of our age really invest in fixed deposits. I have really not invested in fixed deposits apart from maybe one or two instances. I'm sure not many people invest these days in fixed deposits because they offer rates which are barely above the savings account rates. But still, it's a product, so let's look at it, right? So what you can see here is the graph of how inflation has trended in the last 60 years in India, right? And I have drawn these averages here to let you know what is the average level that we are looking at. So on average, we are looking at a 7% inflation in the last 60 years. This is specifically in Indian perspective, right? And the bank's savings account rates, the bank's interest rate that banks offer you are, let's say, 4 to 5%, in the range of 4 to 5% that you get everywhere. Some banks offer 6% also, but not all banks do that. But that 6% again is less compared to the average rate of inflation, which is 7%. So essentially, what is happening is you are forced to look into investment options, because if you put your money in the bank, you're losing money every year, right? Because bank is only paying you 7%, but your money is losing value by the rate of, sorry, bank is only offering you 5%, but you're losing value of your money by the rate of 7% every year. So the net, there's a 2% loss in the value of your money every year if you do not do anything and just keep it in the bank, right? So basically, you are forced to look out and look for investment products for your money, right? You cannot just keep money, right? And that is where Bitcoin comes. When you look at all these products that you're looking at from an investment perspective, all these products offer returns which go to, maybe the highest is 30%, that very specialized mutual funds or very specialized fund managers offer you. But that's the limit, right? You cannot get more than 30%. Some fund managers might offer you 40-50%, but it's really a very, very small minority. And that portion of fund managers will also not offer those kind of returns consistently, whereas the returns for Bitcoin that you see are consistent. So I have plotted out the returns in the 5 to 6 years of between the period of 2017 to 2022, and what you can see is Bitcoin is way higher than all these other asset classes when it comes to returns, right? So it makes a genuine uh, 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 what you can say, a genuine
Case. A
yeah,
case.
a fundamental
Genuine case.
a case for investing in Bitcoin, uh, which is valid for everyone, right? Because
Yeah.
fundamentally, you are given less risk as compared to equity, and you are given easier methods of storage, better returns as compared to all these other asset classes, right? So it makes genuine sense to invest in Bitcoin, right? But that does not solve all the problems. And let's look at some of the other problems, right? So this is where we come to the other section of the presentation, where we discuss about deeper topics. What is inflation? Why do we get inflation? And how is Bitcoin a fundamental innovation in that aspect?